So there are 7 states that have no state income tax. You're exactly right. The data does show that people have been moving at a faster pace to those states with no state income tax.
How to establish domicile when things are a bit murkier. Hello, and thanks for joining us today. So today we're talking about home is where the domicile is. And what the heck is domicile? What we're actually doing is talking about jurisdictional planning. Before we get started, I'm Anneke Niemira, Managing Director, Senior Wealth Strategist at NewEdge Wealth. And we also have Alyssa Kaiser here with us, also a wealth strategist here at NewEdge Wealth. Thanks for joining us, Alyssa.
Yeah, of course.
So today we're going to talk, as I noted, about jurisdictional planning. And what do we mean by that? We're going to be talking about not just physically move somewhere new, but how to get yourself away from the old state and get yourself counting as living in the new state, often to reduce or eliminate state income taxes. We will be covering the difference between residency and domicile. What does it mean to really document that this is your home state? We're going to cover what you need to do in order to make sure that you are really a resident of the new state for all purposes, both the official things and the unofficial things, like making sure your pet goes with you, making sure you don't accidentally get sort of sucked back into your old home state based on how long you're spending there, and other factors that might be more intangible that you want to include there. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. Alyssa, could you start us off with talking about what we mean by domicile versus residency?
Yes. So these words we hear all the time. They're often used interchangeably. But residency really just refers to where you have a place of abode. By that, I mean vacation home, rental home. So you can be a resident of multiple states. Your domicile, though, is really your permanent home, the place you intend to return after being away. And this is the state in which all of your income is subject to income tax.
Makes a lot of sense. And, I see both anecdotally and factually when we look at the statistics that so often, and we see this with our clients, right, our ultra high net worth and high net worth clients, that jurisdictional planning or picking a new home is so often, as we noted earlier, focused on keeping or having a low income tax jurisdiction. Can you tell us, Alyssa, about which states have no state income tax or partially no state income tax for individuals?
Yes. So there are 7 states that have no state income tax. These are Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Wyoming. There are 2 more that only tax some type of income. Those are New Hampshire and Washington State. Washington, for example, only taxes long term capital gains. On the other side of the coin, California, Hawaii, and New York have the highest state income taxes. Local taxes can also, be a factor if you're in a large metro area within those states. So you're exactly right. The data does show that people have been moving at a faster pace to those states with no state income tax. It's probably not the only factor at play, but it is a trend that we see in the data.
No, you're so right. And I'm glad you pointed out, might be if you're living in a particularly urban area or some areas of suburbia also have local taxes. So it's not just factoring in the state tax impact, but also the local tax impact, if any, like living in Manhattan or living in some areas of DC, for example, there are local taxes on top of state taxes. Great. So, with that context, is not just, for many people, having a new domicile is as simple as you put your stuff in a moving truck and you drive it across the country and you're in your new location and voila, you have new domicile and do all the basic stuff like filing your income tax return in a new spot. But otherwise, you've moved, you're done. But we know that clients with significant assets often have more complexity, right, in their lives and where they live, as you noted before. So can you speak about that of how to establish domicile when things are a bit murkier?
Exactly. So if you're picking up and moving from one state to another, you're not going to maintain multiple residencies, then yes, it's much more clear, less complex. There's still some things you have to do, which we'll talk about, but there's a lot less gray area. If you have multiple homes, it does become murky. I like that word. So a common fact pattern is the family that lives in a high tax state purchases a home in a low or no tax state to vacation, perhaps. And they kind of operate under the assumption that as long as they change their address, spend some time there, they can claim that no or low tax state as their domicile. Well, odds are that the high tax state will be really out to confirm that you have taken the right steps to really prove that you no longer live there permanently.
Yeah, I think I like to kind of half jokingly say that some of those high tax jurisdictions are very grabby, right? Like
Oh,
they
yes.
want to, hold on with their fingernails, right, to make sure that you're not actually leaving because they want that tax revenue, which is why it is so important to make sure you follow both the formalities and the informal methods of maintaining domicile. And the more connections the new state, the better, and the fewer connections to the old state, the better. So what are kind of best practices for establishing domicile thematically?
Yeah. So there's really three legs to this stool. First one being the documentation around it. These are some things that you probably have to do anyway, you're going to do anyway, but they really let the respective entities know that you've moved. So these are things like making sure that you register to vote in the new state. You transfer your driver's license, your car to the new state. You make sure to file your income tax return in that new state. If you own a business, perhaps auditors will check that you've changed the address to the new state in which your business will now be operating. So make sure things are documented appropriately.
Documentation is so key, and like you said, voter registration, where are your cars, things like that, right? And all of those matters, but especially the tax, letting the government know where you are officially or where you say you are is super important. So what is, in that area of the things that really have to be done, like the government reporting aspects, like the tax return or voter registration, what are some other things? You mentioned three legs of the stool. What are some additional things that you would do?
So you actually do have to move yourself and what's referred to as the near and dear items. So these are things that naturally you would keep at your home, not a temporary place. We've seen auditors even look to verify insurance policies on things like works of art to really understand where they're being kept. This also includes pets. Are they with you at home, right? Making sure that all of your mail correspondence where your packages go to the new address in that new state. And of course, you absolutely should spend time in the state in which you want to establish domicile. If you can spend the majority of your time there, that's great. But if you're in the camp that's trying to prove that you're no longer living in a high tax state, it's actually more important to not spend time in that high tax state. And we'll talk about that more in a bit.
Yeah, I look forward to that further discussion because I think that's worth repeating. It's more important to be out of the old state than it is to spend as much time in the new state, and we'll focus
Exactly.
on that in a bit, like you said. And what's that third leg of the stool that you mentioned?
Yeah, so these are important and sometimes overlooked. Going back to that case where again you're still trying to prove that one state is really your permanent home. What else proves a connection to that state, right? If you have kids that are school age, are they enrolled in schools in that new state? Have you joined a gym or a social group in that state, or are all of them still in that high tech state? Have you established new healthcare providers? How about your pet's vet, right? Do they go to one in that new state? Even engaging with the local trust and estate attorney to draft updated wills and trusts that reflect that you're now adhering to those new states' laws.
I'm so glad you mentioned that last point. And as a wealth strategist, when you're talking about things that are near and dear and items, things that are near and dear to my own heart are doing your estate planning documents. I know, dorky, but it's very important, not just because it shows, an auditor that no, really, I did move here because I updated my documents accordingly, but because states have different rules for, if you die without a will, for example, but also some states have estate taxes or other state rules that could affect your estate planning. So it's good to make sure that you're corresponding with those in state rules. So that's a great point. Okay, so we've covered kind of the, three legs of the stool. To recap that, of one is the documentation, whether it's the official stuff like government requirements or the unofficial stuff like making sure you have, the cars and the voter registration
Uh-huh.
and all these other items. We've talked about moving yourself and your things, especially your favorite things. These are a few of my
Mhm.
favorite things, like the song. And then also integrating into the community, right? Making sure your estate plan is updated and making sure that you are connected and engaged with the community, whether it be clubs or doctors or just all sorts of, local coffee shop type of stuff. So, with that, how do you make sure, because we talked about all those things to try to make connections to the current location or the new location, but what about making sure you're not accidentally connected to the old location still or some other location? Could you speak to that?
Yes. So even if you do everything that we just outlined, if you maintain a place of abode and spend 183 days or more in that high tax state, you could be considered what's called a statutory resident. What is that? It's just someone that's considered a resident for income tax purposes. So New York says, for example, we may look to see that you did do all the healthcare provider changes, you have a new address, new voting card, but if you still have a home there and stay for 183 days or more, you can still owe income taxes on all of your income.
That's a great point. And, I know that different states have different rules, but most of them do have that 183-day rule. So it is important to check your own state before you just assume more about the state you're trying to leave and not be in, before you just assume that you're fine, everything's copacetic. But I'm glad you brought that up. Just, and there are, that reminds me, there are apps that let people track how many days they're spending in the jurisdiction. You have to fill out the stuff on the app, but at least that way it helps you track. I was in New York this day, I was in Florida this day, I was in Washington State this day, whatever it happens to be. So that can be really helpful as well. So, having talked about how to be in the state, how to be not too many days out of the state. Oh, and to kind of double down on that 183 or more idea. Remember, like we said before, 183 days away from the old state. You don't need 183 days or more in the new state. So an example of that could be that you spend, 5 months in new state and 4 months in old state, and the rest of the time traveling. You spend a quarter traveling about. So you're not really hitting the 183-day mark anywhere, but at least you didn't hit it where you didn't want to hit it. And I think that's
Mhm.
such a important point.
Really, really good point.
So often the goal of moving is to say, I want to be taxed in this local jurisdiction where there isn't tax or there's lower tax. But sometimes it's not as clean as that. Not just, oh, I've only got one house, but also there might be income generated elsewhere that you just can't get away from other state taxation. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, exactly. Tax law can't be easy, right? So
Right,
you
right.
really need to you need to verify where your income is actually coming from. We can't just assume, as you just said, that just a move from one state to another fully immunizes you from all other state income taxes. For example, rental property. If you have another home in a different state that you perhaps may not even live there, you rent it out to tenants, odds are that you still have to file in that state just for that income earned from that property. But again, something to be mindful of. For employment purposes, some may have heard of called the jock tax, often applied to athletes or entertainers, those that travel for their job. Really, it's just a tax that hits non-residents. So you don't need to even own a home there. But if you earn substantial income from being within those states' borders, they will probably look to claim that. Also, if you own your own business, you may live in one state, but if your business is operating in another, be sure to understand where income taxes need to be paid. And this can be even multiplied if you're considering exiting that business, right? There's a large capital gain on the horizon. Just by moving before that occurs, you may not be really off the hook for taxes due in the state in which the business operates.
You're making great points because there's, as you said, I mean, it keeps us employed, but there's like so much complexity in the tax laws. We can't just
Right.
assume that it's an easy answer. So, some of the themes, it's not an exhaustive list, but I think you're highlighting some great areas of things to watch out for. Rental properties in a different state. If you're an athlete or an entertainer where you play a lot of professional games in other
Mhm.
state, I say jurisdictions by habit, but other states. And then you make a great point on the business sale. I've absolutely talked to clients who have said things like, I am going to move to insert name of state with no tax here. and then I will sell my business. And if the business, say, is a widget factory in, Maryland, the widgets are still being made in Maryland and the
Mhm.
business is there. And you can't just change the address on the business and say, oh, look, it's all Florida. So it
Yeah,
is relevant to factor in, is it a stuff making? Is it manufacturing? And can this business move states, or is it still going to have too much nexus or connections to your old jurisdiction? So great points. Definitely something to look out for before making the move, to make sure you understand the repercussions. And I think you're going to be talking about this almost next. But before I forget, speaking of those business topics, we should also remember that states with no state income tax, we're largely talking about individual lack of income tax. And many jurisdictions, or at least some jurisdictions who have no state income tax on individuals, may indeed tax the businesses that are located there. So if you have a business owner moving, intending to transplant the business, they may not actually be helping themselves all that much from the business income perspective. And so that should be looked into as well. Does that sound, am I getting that right?
it's exactly right, because a state or locality needs to earn income in some way, shape, or form, right? So if they're not going to hit you on an individual level, odds are they're looking to combat that by taxing something else. So oftentimes, states with low or no individual income tax have a relatively high corporate income tax, or perhaps a higher sales tax to look into. Sometimes there's even a state level estate tax or inheritance tax to be mindful of. And while we're talking about other, financial factors to consider, even think about things like property insurance, right? So my parents live in the West Palm Beach area. We've heard from them that wind insurance now is extremely expensive and hard to get, especially if you live on the coast, right? So those are some other factors to consider. Sometimes people tend to just jump to the state or local income tax as an expense of being in a certain area, but there are other factors to consider, even on the financial side of things.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that, because you're right. It was the perfect lead in, right? It's such an important point that just because you are making a decision that you think and very often may greatly decrease your overall tax burden, that it's not just about those individual income taxes. And you raised quite a few excellent ones. The insurance one is no joke. It's not just regular property tax. It really is that, I've had clients who've said, I have a property that's worth multiple millions of dollars in a, say, in $5-7 million range in Florida. I have a small mortgage, maybe for them small, $500,000, right? And said, we're just going to pay off the mortgage so that we aren't required by our mortgage lender to have that wind insurance. Aside from whether wind insurance should or should not be purchased, it meant that they were doing that, right? Paying off the mortgage to pay the insurance for that savings benefit. But if you do keep the insurance for insurance reasons, that can greatly increase your overall spending. And a dollar spent is a dollar spent, whether it's to the government or the insurance company or whatnot. So I'm glad you brought that point up. And again, the local tax, the corporate tax, the state estate tax, if any. Having spoken about the financial aspects that might be in addition to the benefit to state income tax, because of course the state needs to replace the revenue somehow, can you speak a bit to the intangible factors, those non-financial things people should think about before making a big change like moving?
Yeah. So, really answering the question of, are you even going to enjoy it? A couple things to hit on. Weather. The South sounds really great until it's mid-August. So, are you prepared for that? If you have kids that are school age, what options are available for their schools? Is it a big cultural change, perhaps moving from a deep blue state to a deep red state? So, just taking some time to think about these factors to ensure it really will be a good fit.
That's a great point. And, other cultural things, sometimes we'll see, some states are quite large, and they have very different feels in the different areas of the state. I live in Virginia, and some people think Virginia is Richmond, and some people think Virginia is DC. And so, in Metro DC, it's a very different cultural feel than in the southern part of Virginia. And I know that's very similar elsewhere. Austin, Texas, keep Austin weird, right? It's a different feel from maybe different areas. So think about not just what state you want to be in, but what area of the state you want to be in. It's culturally a right fit. in not just the political aspects, which is absolutely, potentially relevant for people, but also, are you a museum goer? Do you want to be somewhere urban? Are you, you know, do your hobbies happen to be there, right? Do you have a place to play tennis or ski or swim or independent bookstores? Who knows? Whatever you happen to be into, are your hobbies, right, able to be facilitated in your location? Is it an urban, suburban, or whatnot area? To wrap us up, Alyssa, what would you say are kind of like the final points to make sure that people do before they make this big decision?
Yeah, first things first, make sure to work with a tax planner that knows the ins and outs of the state in which you're wanting to establish domicile, because rules, as we mentioned, really do vary state by state. And we certainly didn't cover all of the complexities and nuances that go into this type of planning. Keep records more than you probably think that you need to. Auditors will ask for them. And the more that you can be proactive and maintain them on your own, the better. We mentioned there are some apps out there to help track days. For example, if you're looking to avoid that statutory residency issue. Also, just make sure to understand all of the rules and regulations. As we said, each state and even locality can differ. If your employment situation changes, make sure that's documented. Whether you're retired or you own your own business, that changes how you approach things. So, again, make sure to speak to a tax professional to make sure all bases are covered.
That's excellent. So, Alyssa, thanks so much for joining us today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I find it very interesting, but again, I'm a geek like that. So, thank you so much for your commentary and for your white paper. For anyone looking for more information, you can always reach out to a member of NewEdge Wealth. Refer to the white paper that Alyssa has done. Home is where the domicile is. And we hope you join us on a future video. Thank you so much.